Today we are going to talk about ecology and specifically food webs and flow of energy in an ecosystem. Now when we talk about the flow of energy in an ecosystem, this is really why food webs are important. When you first learn about food webs, normally you just figure out who eats whom, and it kind of goes through a process of that, and you can put those together. And that's important too, because you can understand a lot about your environment that way. But what we're really getting at here is how energy moves through the biosphere. Biosphere is all living things. So how is the energy being transferred from one organism to another organism? And that's really what we care about. So people who study food webs really get into this movement of energy and what is going on in this process. So we're going to start here with autotrophs. Autotrophs are at the base of everything. And when we refer to autotrophs, we're largely referring to those organisms which photosynthesize, of course, plants. But we also are referring to other organisms which may do what we call chemosynthesize, or get their energy from taking a chemical and being able to process that such that it's able to make its own sugars. So both of these forms of taking these things that are not living and transferring them and making them into a living tissue is the concept here of being an autotroph. Auto refers to self, troph refers to level. So this is this level at which an organism can self-produce its own food. And so let's look at that official definition. An organism that collects energy from sunlight or inorganic substances, and those are those other chemicals, to produce food. And this is a really important base for all the rest of life to exist. The next level is heterotroph. Hetero meaning other, and troph is a level. And so you have eating of an other. And so heterotrophs eat something of another species. So it's an organism that gets its energy requirements by consuming other organisms. And so animals are all heterotrophs. None of us are able to photosynthesize or chemosynthesize. We have to consume something else. So we're going to break down these heterotrophs. One way of being a heterotroph is being an herbivore. And that refers to eating only plants. So if you look here, this cow can eat grass or grains or alfalfa. And such animals as herbivores have special digestive systems to be able to consume plants and get nutrients out of a wide range of plants. And so that is a special thing that different herbivores can do. Then we have carnivores. Carnivores are heterotrophs also, but they prey on other heterotrophs. So you have an animal that eats another animal that eats plants, basically. Or it can be higher up the chain than that, of course. So what this animal here is doing is a wolf, and it's going to go find some rodents or some other animal that it will eat, and these are carnivores. Carnivores have special teeth for eating that will allow it to rip flesh. Herbivores will have more of a grinding type thing to grind plants down, so that you can also see real differences in the physiology of carnivores versus herbivores. Then we have omnivores. Omna meaning all, vores. Like the word voracious means to be very hungry, so eating everything. And of course humans are omnivores. Some of us may choose to be vegetarian or something like that, but you have the capability of digesting both meat and plants. So heterotrophs eat both meat, animals and plants. And here we have a little black bear, and this black bear would be very happy to have a big salmon, but it would also be equally happy to have a bunch of berries. So it has teeth that can deal with both of these types of eating, and that's how we are as well. We have grinding teeth and we have ripping teeth, and that's so we can eat both kinds of food. Then we get into the soil, and we deal with detritivores. Now, detritivores are detritus is our dead things. So we have eating dead stuff, and that's what things like this worm does. We have fungi, which are the kingdom of detritivores. There are so many soil fungi that can live in the soil and break down leaf litter and trees that have fallen down. So when you see like a rotten tree, what you're seeing is the work of a detritivore. It has gotten that last bit of chemical substance out of a dead organism and able to process that and actually consume it. And so detritivores officially are heterotrophs that eat fragments of dead matter in an ecosystem, return nutrients to the soil, air, and water where they can be reused by organisms. So here is our trophic level pyramid. And this is a really important thing. So a trophic level is each step in a food chain or food web. And what we have here is we have at the base, in the green, you see our primary producers, and these are the ones that photosynthesize. Though we also said there's some that chemosynthesize, but we're going to focus on the big group that photosynthesize. And so we have our primary producers. And let's think about why they're at the base of this pyramid. Well, one reason is because when an animal eats a plant, only 10% of the energy of the plants is used for the development of that animal. And so you need a lot of plants to make just one animal. So let's think about a cow. Cows eat basically all day long, and one reason is they need to eat lots and lots and lots of plants in order to make new tissue so that they produce milk and they produce meat and all sorts of things. So that's why you have this base, a very large number of plants relative to or in comparison to your first group of herbivores. Then for an herbivore to be, or primary consumer to be a carnivore or secondary consumer, that's another jump. And for those secondary consumers, only 10% of what they eat of these herbivores actually becomes part of the new organism or the new secondary consumer. The rest of it is released, the rest of that energy is released as heat or is used in the process for eating or hunting, or somehow is used up. So as far as what goes into the body mass of the next level up, it's only 10%. So that's why the pyramid becomes smaller and smaller. By the time you get to the top carnivore, you have only 10% of what they eat actually goes to making their body mass and is energy that will be in there. So a lot of energy is lost on the way up. So when we look at efficiency of eating at lower on the trophic level means eating plants, because the plants, there's a lot more of them, and it's more efficient to go directly to that level than to eat at the top level where there's so much energy has been wasted in the process. At the very bottom of our pyramid here, we have our soil and our decomposers. So after organisms die, things are able to use the dead material and to eat that as well. So here is our food chain. And it's a simple model that shows how energy flows through an ecosystem. So food chains are different depending on where you are. You don't have one food chain for the earth. You have a food chain for one place and another. And in fact, even within, you may have an ocean in one location that has their food chain kind of work in one way, but if the species changes, and they do in different places, then in a different place, the food chain will look quite different as far as who is in the food chain. So we have to think about that when we're considering this. So let's look at a grassland biome. So if you were in a grassland, so your primary producer is your grass. Your primary consumer are the grasshoppers that eat the grass. The secondary consumer is the rat that eats the grasshopper. that eats the grass. Your tertiary, which is the next step up, is the snake that eats the rat that eats the grasshopper that eats grass. Your quaternary is the hawk that eats the snake that eats the rat that eats the grasshopper that eats the grass. So we can now look at the pond. So you have algae as your primary producer. The algae that you may see green, kind of scummy looking stuff floating in a pond, that would be the algae, and it's photosynthesizing. And mosquito larvae will eat the algae. And then a dragonfly larvae will eat the mosquito larva, will eat the algae. Then a fish will eat the dragonfly that eats the mosquito larvae that eats the algae. And a raccoon will eat the fish that eats the dragonfly larvae that eats the mosquito that eats the algae. So you can kind of see the point there. As far as how many levels different places have, the ocean is notorious for having more levels in these food chains than other biomes. The food chain in the ocean is very, very complex. So we go from a food chain where we're just looking at one line to a food web, because honestly, we all know that animals don't just eat one kind of food. Well, they might, but they might not. Many animals will eat multiple things. It depends on the type of animal. Some animals are very specific. There are butterflies that will only eat at certain types of flowers. This does exist. However, there's then also kind of animals that will eat all sorts of things. And a food web will represent both of those things. It'll represent those animals that can only eat one thing, and plants that will only be eaten by one thing. It also represents kind of a more or less picky animal, if you will. So let's define it first. A food web is a model representing the many interconnected food chains and pathways in which energy flows through a group of organisms. Again, we're looking at energy flows because that's really what this is all about. We start again with our base, which are the plants. The arrow goes up, which means that if the arrow between the plants and the mice, it points towards the mouse, meaning the mouse eats the plant. So if the arrow, where the arrow is pointed to, that is what is eaten by what. It's showing energy flow. That's why the arrow is pointed that way, because the fox is going to, for instance, eat a squirrel, and if the fox eats a squirrel, the energy from the squirrel as it eats the squirrel will be going and transferring to the fox. So that's why those arrows are pointed in those directions. And this will really help you understand the relationships of how energy moves. Now, this is our next thing we're going to look at, and this is the actual biomass, which is the total mass of living matter at each trophic level. And we have this rule of 10%. So, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but here it's shown even more clearly. So for every 1,000 kilograms of primary producer, you only have 10% move on, so you have 100 kilograms of herbivores, and only 10% of that, so you only have so then you have 10 kilograms of primary carnivore, and then top carnivore, you have 1 kilogram. Now this pyramid does use some different terms. So for producers, you could say primary producer. For herbivore, you would say primary consumer. For primary carnivore, it should be secondary consumer, and top carnivore, what we could call tertiary consumer. So if that's a little confusing to you, make sure you ask me about that in class. But this shows on that side panel about the different amount the biomass gets reduced each time. That gives you a very good indication of what is necessary in amount of plants to make a top carnivore. So, or a tertiary consumer. And this is really what we're getting at with food webs. This is kind of why it's important that you actually have plant life that is conserved in an area and things like that. And if you have any more questions about that, we can discuss those in class then.